You don't expect cruelty to come dressed as family tradition. You don't expect it to come from a woman who smiles while holding a serving spoon. And you definitely don't expect it to land on your child. But the moment my stepmother told my daughter to get out of her seat, because it was meant for her real grandchild, something inside me went quiet. And when I go quiet, it means I'm done being kind. Because she thought that moment would humiliate my child. What she didn't know was that it would end her control forever. The invitation came wrapped in politeness. Sunday dinner. Family unity. Those were her words. My stepmother, Diane, always liked phrases that sounded generous while hiding sharp edges. She said she wanted everyone together because life is too short for division. I remember reading the text and feeling that familiar tightness in my chest. The kind you get when you know something is off, but you go anyway because you don't want to be labeled difficult. My daughter, Riley, was excited. She's 8 years old, and she picked her own dress that morning. A yellow one with white flowers. She asked if her cousins would be there and practiced saying thank you in the mirror. That alone should have been my warning. Diane never liked enthusiasm she didn't control. When we arrived, everything looked perfect. The table was set like something from a cooking magazine. Food arranged in neat rows. Diane greeted Riley with a quick smile that never reached her eyes. Then she guided her biological grandson, Connor, like royalty. Hand on his shoulder, praising him loudly about his soccer tournament. I clocked it. I always do. Still, I told myself I was being sensitive. I told myself it was just one dinner. I told myself not to make a scene. That was my first mistake. Because by the time everyone sat down, Diane had already decided who belonged where, and who didn't. Riley chose a seat halfway down the table. Nothing special. Just a chair near the middle where she could see everyone. She climbed in, folded her napkin like I'd taught her, and waited. I watched her from across the room, proud in that quiet, parental way. She looked comfortable. Like she belonged. That's when Diane stopped moving. She froze mid-step, eyes narrowing. Not angry, not surprised. Calculating. She stared at Riley's chair like it was a mistake that needed correcting. Oh no, she said lightly, tapping the back of the chair. That seat is for my grandson. Riley blinked. Oh, I can move if you want. That should have been the end of it. A simple misunderstanding. A quick shuffle of chairs. But Diane leaned closer and said the words that changed everything. That seat is for my real grandchild. The word real landed hard. Heavy. Final. The room went silent, but not in the way people think silence works. No one gasped. No one protested. They just waited. To see what I would do. To see if I'd challenge her authority. Riley looked at me. Just once. And in that moment, I saw confusion turn into understanding. And then into something much worse. Diane didn't raise her voice. That's the part people don't understand. Cruelty doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers with perfect manners. Well, she said, waving her hand casually. Go on. Get out of the seat. Not move over. Not switch places. Get out. Riley hesitated, frozen between obedience and dignity. She slid halfway off the chair, unsure what was expected. Her small hands gripped the edge of the table for balance. And that's when Diane sighed. Annoyed. I said, get out. We don't need confusion today. Confusion. Like my daughter's presence was somehow messy. Inconvenient. I felt something snap in my chest, but my body stayed still. I watched Riley stand up slowly, her cheeks burning red. No one spoke. Not my father. Not my siblings. Not the aunts who always talked about family values on social media. Someone cleared their throat. Someone passed the bread. And Diane smiled. Because silence is agreement when it benefits the powerful. Riley stepped back, hands clenched at her sides, and whispered, "It's okay, Mom." But it wasn't. Because humiliation doesn't end when the words stop. It echoes. The car ride home was too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses on your ears and makes every small sound feel loud. Riley stared out the window, tracing invisible patterns on the glass with her finger. I waited. Because pushing a child to talk before they're ready can hurt more than silence. Halfway home, she finally spoke. "Mom." "Yes, baby." Was she right? My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I could see her reflection in the window, her face small and serious. Was I not real? That question cracked something open in me I didn't know how to close. I pulled the car over. Right there on the side of the road. I turned to her and held her face in my hands and told her everything I should have said sooner. That she was real. That she belonged. That no one gets to decide her worth. She nodded. She believed me. But belief doesn't erase memory. And as she leaned her head against my shoulder, I made a decision that had nothing to do with anger. And everything to do with consequence. Because Diane thought this was about a chair. She had no idea it was about power. What Diane didn't know, what she never bothered to ask, was how much of her comfortable life rested quietly on my shoulders. She loved to call herself the family matriarch. The organizer. The reason everyone stayed connected. But behind the scenes, I was the one paying for holidays. Smoothing over debts. Managing access to things she valued deeply. I handled the paperwork for Dad's estate after his stroke 3 years ago. The accounts. The property arrangements. The inheritance details that kept Diane living in that big house rent-free. I'd done it out of loyalty. Out of love for my father. Out of habit from being the reliable daughter who never caused problems. And in that moment, sitting in my parked car with Riley's arms around me, loyalty shifted. I didn't scream. I didn't confront her. I didn't text her a paragraph she could twist into victimhood. I did something far more dangerous. I went quiet. Because when you stop reacting, people get careless. And Diane loved being comfortable. Comfort makes people sloppy. What hurt almost as much as her words was what didn't happen afterward. No one called. No one checked in. No text messages saying just wanted to see how Riley's doing or that was uncomfortable, wasn't it? Nothing. Silence has a sound when you're paying attention. At first, I told myself they were uncomfortable. That people didn't know what to say. But discomfort doesn't stop people from gossiping. And I knew that family. I knew how fast stories traveled when they served the right narrative. Diane, meanwhile, was thriving. Posting photos from the dinner on her social media. Captioning them with words like family, legacy, blood. I watched her carefully curate the version of the dinner that erased Riley entirely. In every photo, Connor was front and center. Riley wasn't in a single one. And no one corrected her. No one commented, "Where's Riley?" Or "Wasn't she there too?" That's when I realized something important. This wasn't just her cruelty. It was the family's permission. They'd chosen the path of least resistance. Protecting her feelings over a child's dignity. And by staying silent, they were betting that I'd do the same. 2 days later, I finally got the call. Diane didn't sound angry. She sounded amused. Light. Like we were discussing a misunderstanding about coffee plans. "I hear you left upset," she said. Left upset. Like I'd had a mood swing over dessert. I asked her to explain what she meant. "Well," she sighed, "you know how children can be sensitive. I was just maintaining order. Tradition matters. Connor always sits in that seat when he visits. It's been that way for years." Order. Tradition. I asked her if she remembered saying the words "real grandchild." She paused. Just long enough to calculate her response. "I don't recall saying it like that," she replied smoothly. "But even if I did, it wasn't meant the way you're taking it. You're being emotional about something innocent." That's the thing about people like Diane. They don't deny harm. They rebrand it. They make you question your own memory. She told me I was being oversensitive. That Riley would understand one day how families work. That there are hierarchies whether we like them or not. Then she added the line she thought would end the conversation. "You don't want to make this bigger than it needs to be." That's when I knew Diane believed she still had the upper hand. And I let her believe it. I apologized for leaving abruptly. I thanked her for calling. I told her she was probably right about me being too emotional. She relaxed immediately. "I'm glad you understand. You know I care about Riley. But sometimes structure is important." We ended the call pleasantly. She probably hung up feeling satisfied. Feeling like she'd successfully managed me back into my place. What she didn't know was that her comfort had just given me permission to act. Because once she thought I agreed with her, she stopped being careful. She stopped watching what she said. She stopped treating me like a threat. That night, Riley sat beside me on the couch while we folded laundry. She was quiet in a way that didn't belong to a child. Finally, she asked, "Do I have to try harder to belong?" I froze. That question didn't come from insecurity. It came from conditioning. From learning that love might be earned if you perform correctly. I told her no. I told her belonging doesn't require auditioning. But later, after Riley went to bed, I realized something that made my stomach drop. This wasn't just about one dinner. This was about what she would learn if I let it go. Children don't remember lectures. They remember what you allow. And if I allowed someone to humiliate her publicly without consequence, then I was teaching her that her pain ranked below comfort and tradition. That was unacceptable. So I did what I always do when things turn serious. I stopped speaking and started preparing. Because Diane had no idea how much access she'd given me over the years. For years, I'd been the reliable one. The problem solver. The person everyone called when paperwork needed handling or something needed smoothing over. Diane trusted me because I'd never challenged her authority. That trust came with access. Access to accounts. Access to documents. Access to arrangements she barely understood but fully benefited from. I didn't snoop. I didn't steal. I didn't fabricate anything. I reviewed what I already had permission to see. And what I found told a very different story about who actually held things together. Diane's lifestyle, her image, was fragile. Propped up by assumptions. By favors people forgot they owed me. By agreements made quietly, never expecting resistance. The house she lived in. Technically Dad's property, but the utilities, the maintenance, the property taxes, all managed through accounts I controlled as Dad's healthcare proxy. The family reunions she hosted. I coordinated the venue bookings, handled the deposits, managed the guest lists. Even the small things. Her car insurance bundled with Dad's policy. Her phone plan under the family account. Her membership to the country club processed through the estate's recreational fund. None of it was illegal. None of it was secret. It was just invisible labor that became visible when it stopped. I began documenting everything. Dates. Messages. Patterns. Not to expose her immediately, but to understand where the pressure points were. Because power doesn't come from yelling. It comes from leverage. And leverage requires patience. Patience was something I had plenty of. Because I wasn't reacting anymore. I was planning. People always ask why I didn't confront her immediately. Why I didn't demand an apology. Why I didn't make a scene. Why I didn't stand up for my child in the moment. Here's the truth. Confrontation would have given her control. She would have cried. Played victim. Turned the family against me for overreacting over a chair. She would have made it about my anger instead of her cruelty. Instead, I chose clarity over chaos. I let her believe she'd won. I attended family events. I smiled. I spoke politely. I thanked her for invitations. I even brought gifts to the next gathering. And she relaxed. She started talking more freely. Making careless comments. Assuming I was still on her side. That's when people show you exactly who they are. The more agreeable I became, the bolder she got. She bragged openly about how families work best with clear lines. About how children should know their place. About how respect flows upward from grandchildren to grandparents. She said these things with confidence. Because she believed I was no longer a threat. I never corrected her. I listened. And every word she spoke quietly confirmed something I already knew. She didn't regret what she did. She regretted being questioned at all. That told me this wasn't about education or healing. It was about consequence. And consequences are always strongest when they arrive publicly. Then she asked me for something. A large family event. She was hosting Thanksgiving this year. It required organization, coordination, and most importantly, my involvement. She needed my help. My presence. My credibility with the extended family. My ability to make things run smoothly. I said yes immediately. Because nothing exposes power dynamics like a stage. And this time, I was controlling the lighting. I gathered everything quietly over the next few weeks. Messages. Witnesses. Dates. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't dramatize. I let the facts speak. And facts have a way of standing up straight in rooms full of lies. I also made a few phone calls. Quiet ones. To cousins who'd been at that dinner. To aunts who'd stayed silent. I asked simple questions. Do you remember what happened at the last dinner? What did you hear? Most of them remembered. Some had felt uncomfortable but didn't want to cause drama. Others had noticed Riley's face but convinced themselves it wasn't their business. I didn't pressure anyone. I just asked them to tell the truth if it ever came up again. That's all. The day of Thanksgiving arrived. The house was full. Laughter. Cameras. Relatives eager to impress. Diane glowed. She wore her best dress and moved through the rooms like she owned not just the house but everyone in it. She thought this was her victory lap. A return to normal. Proof that I'd fallen back in line. She had no idea it was her final performance. I waited until everyone was seated. Until the table was full and the room naturally quieted as people prepared to eat. Diane stood at the head of the table, ready to say grace. Ready to perform her role as the family's spiritual center. That's when I spoke. Calmly. Clearly. Diane, before we start, can I ask you something? She looked at me, surprised but pleased. Probably thinking I was about to thank her publicly for hosting. Of course, dear. I smiled. Do you remember telling Riley to leave her seat at the last dinner because she wasn't your real grandchild? The room froze. Forks hovered mid-air. Someone's glass stopped halfway to their mouth. Diane's smile flickered. Just for a second. Then she laughed. Not because it was funny, but because she thought laughter could shrink reality. I would never say something like that, she said, shaking her head. You must be mistaken. Mistaken. She glanced around the table, searching for agreement. A few people shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke yet. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't on her side. I repeated the words. Slowly. Exactly as she'd said them. That seat is for my real grandchild. Get out. Her smile faltered completely now. She straightened her posture, switching tactics. You're twisting things. I was managing seating arrangements. Anyone here knows how emotional you can be. There it was. The character attack. Predictable as sunrise. But something had changed. People weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at her. Because denial only works when no one else remembers. And this time, they did. My cousin, Vanessa, cleared her throat. I remember it, she said quietly. Diane turned, eyes sharp. Remember what? The way you said it, Vanessa continued. You emphasized real. It made everyone uncomfortable. Another voice joined in. My brother's wife, April. I noticed Riley left the table right after. She looked upset. Then my uncle. I thought it was harsh at the time, but I didn't want to cause a scene. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just factual. One by one, people confirmed what had happened. Diane's confidence drained by inches. She tried to interrupt, but the room had shifted. The authority she relied on, fear, politeness, hierarchy, was cracking. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Because truth doesn't require volume when witnesses are willing. Someone mentioned how Riley had seemed different after that dinner. Quieter. Someone else said they'd noticed Diane never included Riley in photos. Patterns emerged. Not just about that night, but about years of subtle exclusions. Diane's hands clenched at her sides. She wasn't losing control because of what she'd done. She was losing control because she was being seen. I stood slowly. I didn't bring this up to embarrass you, I said. I brought it up because you taught my child a lesson you didn't intend. She crossed her arms. Defensive. Cornered. You showed her exactly who gets protection in this family, I continued. And I want to be very clear about something. I paused, letting the silence work. The access you've had to resources, events, and support, it came through me. Murmurs rippled through the room. Diane's eyes widened. She knew where this was going now. I explained calmly. The logistics I handled. The arrangements I made. The accounts I managed. The quiet work behind the scenes that allowed certain traditions to exist. I didn't threaten. I clarified. And as of tonight, I finished, that access ends. Her face drained of color. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Because consequences sound different when they're spoken calmly. The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. People recalculated in real time. You could see it in their eyes. The social math changed instantly. Diane looked around for allies, but allies disappear when leverage does. When the person who makes things work stops working for you, people notice. You're being vindictive, she said, voice shaking. I nodded. I'm being protective. That word landed differently. Protective. Because suddenly, this wasn't about adult conflict anymore. It was about a child. And no one wanted to be on the wrong side of that story. My father finally stood. Not to defend Diane. But to say, this shouldn't have happened. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was enough. Because when the person who'd been silent the longest finally speaks, people listen. Diane's mask finally slipped. She cried. Accused. Rewrote history out loud. Claimed she'd been misunderstood, disrespected, ambushed. No one intervened. Because when power leaves someone, their performance stops working. She demanded an apology. No one offered one. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult her. I simply repeated what mattered. You don't get to define my child's place in this family. That was the end of the discussion. Not because I won an argument, but because I ended her authority. Then Riley did something that sealed it. She stood up. The room went silent again, but this time it was reverent. I just want to say something, she said, steady but soft. Every eye turned to her. This small 8-year-old girl in her yellow dress. I didn't understand why I had to move that day. But now I know I didn't do anything wrong. She looked at me. Then at the table. I'm real, she said simply. And I don't need to prove it. No one clapped. No one cried. Because truth doesn't need applause. It just needs to be spoken. Diane looked away. And from that moment on, nothing went back to normal. The event ended early. People left quietly. Conversations shifted. The family adjusted without Diane at the center. In the weeks that followed, Diane stopped hosting. Stopped calling. Stopped being centered in family decisions. Not because anyone punished her, but because the structure that held her in place had dissolved. I transferred Dad's accounts to a professional management service. I removed myself from the utility bills and insurance policies. I stopped coordinating events and managing schedules. And the family adapted. Naturally. Quietly. Diane tried to regain control a few times. She called my siblings, tried to paint me as cruel and ungrateful. But her version of events didn't match what people had witnessed. When she claimed I was overreacting, someone would mention the witnesses. When she said it was all a misunderstanding, someone would ask about the other times Riley had been excluded. Her power had been built on silence. And silence only works when everyone participates. This time, they didn't. At home, Riley changed. She laughed more. She stopped asking if she belonged. She stopped shrinking herself in family photos. Because children bloom when they feel protected. Christmas came. For the first time in years, we didn't go to Diane's house. We started our own tradition. Just Riley and me. We decorated cookies and watched movies and didn't worry about seating arrangements or whose grandchild was more real. Riley asked once if Diane would ever apologize. I told her the truth. Maybe. Maybe not. But we don't need her apology to know you matter. She thought about that, then nodded. People from the family reached out individually. Some apologized for staying silent. Some thanked me for saying what they'd been too afraid to say. Some just wanted to rebuild relationships on different terms. I accepted some of those offers. Not all. Because proximity isn't the same as safety. Diane still exists in the family. But without power. Without authority. Without the stage she'd built her identity on. And that loss was louder than any argument. Because status, once gone, never returns the same way. People remember. Not always the details. But the feeling. The shift. My father called me a few months later. His voice was tired. I should have said something that day, he admitted. I was afraid of confrontation. I told myself it wasn't that serious. I didn't make it easy for him. It was serious to Riley. I know, he said. I'm sorry. It wasn't enough to fix everything. But it was something. A recognition that silence has consequences too. We rebuilt our relationship slowly. On new terms. Where I didn't manage his life and he didn't expect me to absorb cruelty for the sake of peace. Diane and I barely speak now. We're polite at necessary gatherings. We don't pretend to be close. She lost more than access to accounts. She lost the narrative. The ability to shape how people saw her. The automatic deference she'd enjoyed for years. And she knows why. Not because I reminded her. But because every time she sees Riley now, healthy and confident and unbothered by her opinion, she's reminded. People ask if I regret how I handled it. If I wish I'd been quieter. More forgiving. More willing to let it go for the sake of family peace. I don't. Because family peace built on a child's humiliation isn't peace. It's silence wearing a mask. Riley is 10 now. She still remembers that dinner. But when she talks about it, she doesn't sound wounded. She sounds matter-of-fact. That was when you stood up for me, she says. And that's what matters. Not that I protected her from ever being hurt. But that when she was hurt, I didn't ask her to pretend it didn't happen. I taught her that her dignity matters. That family doesn't mean accepting cruelty. That love doesn't require shrinking yourself. Those are lessons that will outlive every tradition that tried to erase her. Diane lives in a smaller place now. Dad's house was sold after his health declined further. She didn't get to make that decision. The estate trustees did. She tried to fight it. Claimed sentimental attachment. But sentiment doesn't override legal authority. And I'd made sure the legal structure was clear. She has enough to be comfortable. But not enough to be powerful. There's a difference. I see her sometimes at family events. She's older now. Quieter. She doesn't hold court the way she used to. Sometimes I wonder if she understands what she lost. If she connects her current position to that moment at the dinner table. Probably not. People like Diane rarely see themselves clearly. They rewrite history until they're always the victim. But it doesn't matter what she understands. What matters is what Riley learned. Riley asked me once if I ever felt guilty. If I worried I'd been too harsh. I told her no. Because harshness would have been public humiliation. Cruelty would have been using my power to destroy Diane completely. What I did was set boundaries. Clear consequences. A recalibration of who held what power and why. You protected yourself too, Riley observed. Not just me. She was right. I had. Because mothers are also people. And teaching children that mothers deserve dignity teaches them they deserve it too. We're building something different now. A version of family that doesn't require hierarchy or performance. Where love is measured by presence, not power. It's smaller. Quieter. But it's ours. And when Riley grows up and builds her own family, she'll know this. Belonging doesn't require permission from people who make you prove your worth. You belong because you exist. That's enough. I think about that dinner sometimes. The moment when everything shifted. Not the confrontation at Thanksgiving. But the earlier one. When Riley looked at me from that chair and saw me see her pain. That was the moment that mattered. Because children remember when you choose them. When you stop accepting what's easier and start demanding what's right. Diane thought she was teaching Riley her place. What she actually did was teach me mine. My place isn't managing other people's comfort. It isn't absorbing cruelty to keep peace. My place is standing between my child and anyone who tries to make her small. People say revenge is ugly. But this wasn't revenge. This was correction. I didn't teach Riley to fight. I taught her to stand. To speak. To know her worth isn't determined by people who don't value her. And that lesson will outlive every tradition that tried to erase her. Because the most powerful thing you can give a child isn't protection from pain. It's proof that when pain comes, someone will be there. Someone will act. Someone will choose them. Every single time.